Hi, hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening for this program, Redesigning the Office. I am Elizabeth Goldstein and I'm the president of MAS, and we couldn't be more delighted to have you with us this evening. Central business districts are essential to New York City life, with their towers defining the skyline, taxes funding vital city services, and populations supporting a street-level ecosystem of small businesses and transit infrastructure. Since the onset of COVID-19, they have remained mostly vacant, grinding these dependencies to a standstill. In an uncertain future, with infection rates still on the rise across the country and volatile in some New York City neighborhoods, employers are continuing to perfect ways to work remotely, and some have even decided to implement work from home permanently. This conversation will examine how we can adapt and design office space that is safe, healthy, and economically viable. Before we start, there are a few things that I'd like to note. Using the chat function, you can comment and interact with one another. There is also a Q&A button on the bottom of your screen. There you can share any questions, and our panelists will take time towards the end to answer them. We will also share polls for our audience to respond to throughout the program, and have added some tips to the chat for your reference. If you need any assistance, you can chat MAS staff directly, and they are marked with MAS under the participant list. Our program tonight is anticipated to run about an hour and is being recorded. A recording will be available later on our YouTube channel and Facebook page, where you can also view past programs. As a reminder, tonight's program offers free CM credits to AICP members. It is now my pleasure and honor to introduce our moderator, Jill Lerner. Jill is a managing partner at Cohn Pedersen Fox Associates, where she leads award-winning projects in both public and private sectors in New York City and around the world. She focuses on complex infrastructure and institutional work, for which she is responsible for all aspects of project management and design. She speaks frequently on issues of planning, resilience, innovation, and women's leadership, and is a registered architect in several states and a fellow of the American Institute of Architects. We are lucky to have her support and expertise at MAS as a board member and chair of our planning committee as well. I'm delighted to turn things over now to Jill, and who will be introducing our panelists for the evening. Thank you. Let's get started.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I am delighted to be here and particularly honored to have MAS talk about such a really relevant topic, something on everyone's mind who's a New Yorker, who works here, who used to work here and now is not in the city, and so forth. So before we get started, just a few of my own comments. Our firm has 700 people around the globe, but 400 of whom work in New York City. And, you know, like other firms, we have really utilized the work from home and the technology and created whole new systems that have allowed us to keep our business going, keep thriving, keep us connected, try to maximize the opportunities for, you know, personal connection, both in more formal settings and informal settings. And it's been challenging, it's been exciting, it's been successful in so many ways, but we all still miss the office, and we are city people and we enjoy being together. And so this panel is really a nice mix, I think, of people that will bring a variety of perspectives of how New York can get out of this chaos that we're in, and how we can come back to work in a safe and effective workplace. And I'm really excited about the conversations that we've been having, and look forward to sharing that with everybody in the audience. So, first panelist I would like to introduce is Dean Sam Chandan, who is the Silverstein Chair and Academic Dean of NYU's Schack Institute of Real Estate, and the Institute for Cities in Emerging Markets at NYU Shanghai, which happens to be our project. He is founder of Chandan Economics, a provider of risk analytics to banks and bank regulators a contributor to Forbes, a host of the Urban Lab and special editions of the Real Estate Hour on Sirius XM. Dean Chandan has served on the faculties of the Wharton School and of Dartmouth College. He was previously global chief economist at Real Capital Analytics and the chief economist at Reese. Okay, Sam, so question for you, welcome. My question for you to get started is, you bring a global perspective, and I know you know what's going on around the world in many cities besides our own. So how do you think different cities will cope in the new post-COVID era, and what are they doing around the globe to get themselves out of the COVID crisis?
Sure. Thank you, Jill. And thanks to everyone at MAS for hosting this event. Really a privilege to be here. I think, as you pointed out, we really are looking at cities around the world. And the qualifier I'll offer is that there are real differences in the quality of the data that we're looking at. As an economist and an econometrician, heavily dependent upon the data to draw any kind of conclusions about what we see happening in different metropolitan areas. That being said, what's very clear is that different cities are in different places in terms of their management of the pandemic. And that is in part flowing from the simple fact that, for example, in the major metropolitan centers in China, they are further along in the life cycle of the virus and have been remarkably effective in containing the virus after that first initial surge, as compared to, for example, a country like Canada, where the numbers were brought down, after that first initial wave in March and April. Contagion numbers, or I should say, positive test numbers, as a percentage of tests, were very, very low for a protracted period of time. But where Canada is now actually experiencing a significant surge in its major cities, and is reporting virus numbers that are on par with where they were, in that springtime period when we were all grappling with, that first, the first wave of the pandemic. So different cities are really in different places. We also see very big differences in how local governments are managing to keep those numbers down, or in some cases are having to course correct after they discovered that some of the relaxation of constraints on household and business behaviors are actually proving to be more dangerous missteps than they had originally imagined. So invariably, it's not a linear path. There's some course correction. When we then look at this, the last piece of this, which is how are cities and how are businesses within cities adjusting their behaviors in ways that have, that are critically relevant for our thinking about office space use. Across the many scenarios that we're modeling, in the data, there are three sort of dominant world views that we're trying to capture. One is what we refer to as our reversion hypothesis, which quite frankly I assign a low probability to, but in the reversion hypothesis, we revert to pre-pandemic modes of behavior for consumers and businesses once we have a highly efficacious vaccine and one that is widely adopted. Those are two big ifs. The second hypothesis is what we refer to as the acceleration hypothesis, underlying trends that were already at play, changing how we think about remote work, online shopping, but the organic change in the way that we function and engage with one another having been significantly accelerated and exhibiting some permanence, after in the post-pandemic era. And the third hypothesis is what we refer to the inflection hypothesis, where we actually observe significant new and unexpected patterns of behavior that are motivated by the pandemic itself. Across all of those, I think what we see is very real differences in the way that people are going back to their offices, across different metropolitan areas, the way and differences in central business districts around that conversation, which is so top of mind for all of us in New York. How competitive will the city be in attracting office-using employment, in retaining residents in that post-pandemic phase? So there I'd say, and I'll elaborate on this later, that, two of the things that are really showing up as critically important in the data as drivers of the business resumption plan and how many people we see going back to the office when we look at markets around the country and around the world are first, the quality and effectiveness of the underlying public transportation infrastructure being really critical to what we see actually then happening with people going back to work. And then the other, this question of how competitive and attractive will my city be, is coming down to issues that we face very significantly here in New York around the fiscal health of the city and our ability to maintain a reasonable and fair level of taxes. And to provide the whole range of public services that we'll need in the post-pandemic era, whether it be subways or good quality public schools, to remain an attractive center for citizens and for businesses.
Great, thank you very, very much. More later. Okay, moving on. Our next panelist is Rachel Gutter, who is president of the International Well Building Institute, a public benefit corporation with a mission to improve human health and well-being through the built environment. Rachel also served as Senior Vice President of Knowledge and was founding director of the Center for Green Schools at the U.S. Green Building Council. Her contributions to sustainable buildings have been featured in numerous outlets, including the New York Times, the Washington Post, NPR, and many others. Welcome, Rachel. Hi. So my question for you is you have really devoted your career to considering the environments we work in and we live in, but mostly work in from a health and wellness perspective. So clearly this speaks right to the concerns of safety, security, health, and so forth that we are all thinking about when we all contemplate going back to the work environment. So I understand there's been quite a groundswell of interest in healthy buildings since the pandemic started. And this falls into perhaps one of your trends that or one of your scenarios you mentioned, Sam, about, trends that were already in the works that have been accelerated by virtue of the pandemic. So can you comment on what you've seen from your perspective?
Absolutely. Thanks so much to you and MAS for having me this evening. I wish we could all be together in person. Yes, the CEO of IWBI, who's also the past CEO and founder of the U.S. Green Building Council, the creators of LEED, Rick Fedrizzi, pre-pandemic referred to this movement toward healthy buildings as the second wave of sustainability, but with COVID-19, it's more like a second tsunami. Since the pandemic started, we have been registering 1 million square feet of real estate for our voluntary third-party certification well every single day. As a result of the pandemic and the coming together of our COVID-19 task force, which included 600 different experts from virologists to building scientists to architects and design practitioners and real estate executives. One of the primary outcomes of that task force was a new product called the Well Health Safety Rating. Now, this is a rating that's specifically designed to address acute health risks in the built environment, in particular COVID-19, but extending beyond that as well. In less than 3 months since we launched that product, we've had more projects, more building spaces and places register to achieve the Well Health Safety Rating than in our entire history. We've seen projects register under WELL. That is just nearly overnight. We have entire Fortune 500 organizations enrolling their entire portfolio. I think what we see there are two different types of customers, which is a good answer to your question. There's a group of people who go, I'm doing all of the right things. I just need somebody to check my work so I can put this stamp on the seal on the door. That seal on the outside means I can feel more confident going inside. So it pertains to a lot of what Sam was talking about in addressing this confidence gap. So that's the first wave of demand that we're seeing. It's like they're on top of their game, but they're going to document that, have a third party review it, and have somebody check and affirm their work. The second category of individuals are the ones who are going, I don't know what to do, just tell us what to do. And that's a slower start, but probably the more hopeful one in terms of thinking about, as Sam was speaking, what are those lasting changes that we're going to see into the future?
All right. A well tsunami. Well, that's good. It's good people are turning to you for how to make these environments healthy. That's actually really positive. So the next member of our panel is Kent Swig. So Kent is also an MAS board member, and I enjoy sharing that our board discussions together. And he owns several real estate companies here in New York as well as elsewhere, and they are both commercial and residential properties. They include Terra Holdings, Swigg Equities, Brown, Harris, Stevens, Helmsley Spear, Falcon Pacific Construction Builders, and the Swigg Company. So, Kent, for you, my question is, you are in the thick of it. The real estate industry has really taken a hit in COVID. Everyone knows that. It's been very well publicized. You know, office space is, you know, I heard a statistic earlier today, actually, that 1 in 10 office workers in New York City is now in the office. So that's very, very, you know, 10%, it's 90% are not there. So what do you think the future holds, and how can New York in particular, get back to coming to work in the city?
First of all, thank you very much, Jill, and it's a pleasure to be on the panel and to be associated with MAS, which is a joy for me, and I'm very proud for me to be on the board. So, first of all, New York City, which is we love, is a very dense city. So its strength is its density, right? Our weakness at this point in the COVID is our density too, and that poses a problem. So I will go through a couple things in just quickly on retail, commercial, residential, and hotel, because they're all being impacted. I would say that we're all being impacted very severely. Real estate maybe, you know, seems like it's the poster child of the disruption at the moment, but on a personal level, it's hitting, you know, everybody very, very impactfully. On the retail, I would have to say that Dean Sam way of looking at something which was something that was happening prior to, a trend that was happening prior to COVID, has been further exacerbated and happening now. Retail itself, like Sir Isaac Newton said, you know, about matter is neither created nor destroyed, it merely changes its form. Retail is not really being created or destroyed, but it is certainly changing its form. So people are buying things, they will continue to buy things, and that would be, you know, adjusted through economic conditions, obviously. But whether it's online or going to a store, there is retail movement that's happening, or off your phone or whatever it is. The form change is rather significant. That was happening beforehand, and that's really where big box users are no longer in vogue, right? So a lot of that was for marketing purposes. That was a lot for promotional purposes. And if you had a big store in New York City, yes, it may be a little bit expensive, but it overall really impacted on a positive level for your brand. So in my opinion, what's going to be happening is, and the trend that had happening, is going to be a better thing for New Yorkers for quality of life. We're going to go back to smaller mom and pop stores like they have in Paris, chocolatiers, card stores, flower stores, all these handmade things, which made New York really terrific beforehand. So now, and I think that's going to be enhanced because the prices are going to fall for retail. So that's going to allow, when we get into a post-COVID situation, that's going to allow the mom and pop to operate. And the quality of life, in my opinion, forgetting money for a moment, but the quality of life is going to be improved. And so rents go down and it'll be adjusted. Now, the problem with COVID is that we're going to be in a musical chairs situation. Everybody is going to be going around and changing. So you may have one restaurant going out and the same owners may be going into a different place, and that's going to create some havoc that goes on. On the commercial side, I think what we're finding is that doing work from home is not as efficient, potentially, you know, as doing work in an office. Certainly, I think creativity and opportunity are lost without that human interaction. I know, Jill, you were talking about what you could mention, how your office works, and maybe it has a different perspective on quality and other things of the way people work. But I think that being in an office is a very, is a very effective thing. And being in a dense place, ultimately post-COVID, is wonderful. So look at Facebook, that took 1.5 million square feet in Hudson Yards. They have not yet occupied that. They're still building it. And in the middle of the pandemic in July, they leased 730,000 square feet additional space at the Farley office building, which is telling you, which is telling you what they think of the importance of human interaction. Okay. So, and that density is what creates a lot of energy. New York City has 28,000 people per square mile. The next highest dense city is San Francisco at 17,000 people per square mile. So, we're a very dense area. Overall, I think commercial will be okay. We're going through a very rough period of time. Our office, we're a brokerage office. We're dependent on Brown Harris Stevens. We have 2,000 brokers. At Helmsley Sparrow, we've got 35 agents. We're dependent on people moving and doing things. So it's it's a lifeblood of what we do, and that impact is got to happen. And then you've got residential and hotel, which we can touch on in a minute. Residential is starting to get more active. It's certainly in the suburbs, a very, very, very strong market. The city, New York City itself, is considered Manhattan. So Manhattan has been much more hard hit. Brooklyn and Queens, a lot less so. In fact, the new project developments are selling at a clip of 120% of where they were last year in terms of activity level. And Brooklyn, because Brooklyn isn't quite associated with New York City, even though it's huge. And the hotel market, we're going to go in for a rough ride, I think, during that time, until people start feeling safe to travel again. The concept of being in a hotel, though, with cleaning and all the project, I think they can project themselves as a very, very safe place. Problem is that it's dependent on travel, and so we're getting hit there on that part.
Thank you, everybody. Really appreciate all your perspectives. So one of the things that's been difficult for all of us to comprehend is the length of this situation, how long it's going to go on. And, when we all first started working from home, I think most of us thought it would be a few weeks, maybe a few months, but here we are, past the 6-month mark. It's looking longer and longer, and it's looking like it's not going to be a lightning bolt of coming back to life, that suddenly there's a vaccine and everybody, jumps back to work, right? It's going to be, a gradual coming back. And I think for our city, the longer it takes to recover, the more difficult it's going to be to get us out of this hole, because how long can restaurants continue to limp along? How long can cultural institutions limp along, and so forth? So what do you think is the long range risk of a work from home environment in terms of how you see things? Rachel, how about we start with you? And is it sustainable? And how long would it be sustainable to do that?
I remember a conversation that I was having with the COO of our parent company when the pandemic first started, and we were talking about, working hours and concerns about whether people would be productive in a work from home environment in full. And I said, my feeling about this is that productivity is the long game. And we've got to treat it like that. And I think that's exactly what we've seen, that there was absolutely an initial burst of productivity. It was inertia, it was fight or flight, it was, people's anxiety about losing their jobs. It was just being at home all the time and not having a whole lot of other things to do to occupy your mind when your mind wanted to go in so many scary places. And so I think a lot of organizations initially were reporting higher levels of productivity. Most of the early data that I've seen, it's a lot of self-reported. It's a good gauge. What we're starting to see right now is a fully work from home scenario start to fray around the edges. Huge losses of productivity that have to do with childcare requirements and parents not having full-time support for their children, so juggling childcare with their day job. You've got a loss of a lot of collaborative opportunities, which ultimately will contribute longer term to a reduction in productivity. And so I think that while organizations were sort of threatening to stay home forever because look, we're seeing all this productivity. I think that there are many different metrics that we're starting to be able to key into that prove the notion that brought us to offices in the first place, which is that we're a human species. We crave connection with one another. We do a lot of types of best work when we're together, and other types of work better when we're by ourselves and in a quiet and private place. That mix, I think, will be better distributed in the future. I do feel very strongly that one of the silver linings of COVID will be a greater level of acceptance, particularly from baby boomers and older, of work from home as a productive solution. I have many mentors who are very senior, very high up in their career, running organizations, saying like, I just don't believe it. I just don't believe people are going to be productive from home. And every single one of them has come around as a result of the pandemic. You know what? We're really doing this. Like, we're really being productive and producing a lot of great things, but some things are really hard to replicate in a solely work from home environment.
So Kent, I know the real estate industry, yourself and others, have been very quick to be leaders in terms of coming back to the office. And you rent properties, you build properties, and you want to demonstrate that it's still great to work in the city, and and it's safe, and you can do it, and you're doing it. So what do you feel about what Rachel had to say, and how how sustainable is this long term, and what will make people really come back?
Well, what's going to make people come back, and I think Dean Sam touched on this, and that is three things in New York. One is transportation. We need a good, safe, efficient transportation system, and it was getting better, and we were doing a lot of new capital work, and then boom, we got hit with the COVID. So New York immediately, frankly, needs about $12.1 billion of federal aid to be able to support that, and the amount of revenue that is generated by our city and the taxes that we pay far outstrip money that we receive from the federal government. And it is a wise investment in America's economy to be able to put money into the transportation system, particularly in New York City. So that's number one. Secondly, you need a safe environment, or that would be first, frankly, is a safe environment. And it's more than just being safe. It is people, as Rachel said, feeling safe, right? So you have to feel that you have the layers of protection, and the businesses are providing that layer of protection, which is repeatable every day, and it becomes a part of your life. And that is the number one thing that you have to do. So we have a responsibility. We've got people coming in our office all the time, and and you have to be. People are, they walk out of their office and they forget their mask. People make mistakes. You've got to be on that program really to be helpful, because one individual is part of the collective here. So our sense of collective, I think, is one of the areas that we will benefit from this COVID, because our sense of our interconnectivity with other people and what can happen to us in life, and we are not sitting on islands as individuals. I think that's a positive impact, because we realize, and we crave that connectivity. So that's something that's there. And then we have our physical safety. I think that we need to have a police force that works with the community that works with the police force. And the police force has issues, right? And does that make them bad? Absolutely not. 98%, 99% of any particular population could be great, but there's always some that aren't. So we have to admit when we have issues and correct them. Defunding, I don't think, is a help. I think funding more and more education and more sensitivity is a good answer. So those are the kind of things that I think will help the real estate community, get back, and our businesses to get back. I'm back in every day at this point, and it is magnificent to be back, and I feel comfortable, I feel safe, and if things change, then I'm going to work remotely, and they may, right? So, but in the meantime, the amount of business I can get done and the interconnectivity with people is I recognize how much I miss that.
All right, Sam. Over to
Yeah,
you.
no, I think both Rachel and Kent have raised some critically important points here. To Rachel's, we think of it and describe it in terms of that initial surge capacity. It was almost a fight or flight response that we were all experiencing in the early stages of the pandemic, combined with, as Rachel pointed out, not actually being able to do anything else. So we observed a surge in productivity, but we shouldn't mistake that for long-term gains in productivity. Part of what we're conflating is that people were literally just spending more hours working. That being said, to Kent's point, I think where we observe variation in people's observations and commentary on wanting to go back or the effectiveness of working remotely or in the office, part of what that is capturing in our initial look at the data is that different occupations, but also different tasks within an occupation. There are some things that can be done much more effectively remotely from home, removed from the office. And there are some things that absolutely demand that physical co-location as an input to the idea generation process. And so imagine a scenario. There's too much commentary in the press, too many editorials about how the city is either dead or going to return to a pre-pandemic norm. You can imagine a scenario where we're a little bit more judicious and say, you know what, there are some, I'm going to set aside a day where I just catch up on emails, and I can do that very effectively from home. Or given a precarious situation for the school district, it may be the case that a school district in a particular market decides that they're only going to, the new normal is going to be having folks in the classroom 3 or 4 days a week. Part of their motivation is not just pedagogy; it's that their school district may not be able to afford to bring everyone in every day, and so needing that flexibility as well. Imagine a scenario where we do, there's a greater acceptance, as Rachel pointed out, of the role that work from home or working remotely can play for an appropriate set of tasks and functions. But we absolutely don't want to give up what Kent pointed out is that the serendipity that results from our being in the same place at the same time. That becomes really important. Brings me to my last point on this, which is that there's been a differential in the impact of the pandemic and work from home on different folks within the organization. One, of course, I think we need to recognize that we're all in a very privileged position in being able to, in mid-March, go home, plug back in, and get productive again. So many people that have been so deeply impacted by the pandemic have not had that luxury, just given the nature of their work. But the other thing that's been critically important, it's foremost on my mind because I work with students most of the time. The way in which we've experienced the pandemic as established professionals with networks that we can rely on, people that we can reach out to, relationships that have been developed over time is quite different from the experience of someone who graduated in May, has gone into the industry, in in Kent's case, real estate, and may not have had the relationships, the mentors, the trust building, trying to build meaningful long-term trust relationships without the physical co-location is much, much tougher. And so I think this has been significantly more challenging for younger people that have not already established themselves. I think we've all been working very hard to support them, but it's another dimension of this that I think requires that we understand better what are those things for which we need to be in the office, for which the formal and informal benefits flow from being co-located, and separate those out from the things that can actually be done in a slightly different balance while working remotely.
So I do a lot of academic and research buildings, and one thing in academia is that learning takes place inside and outside the classroom, and in formal and informal settings, and over technology and in person and over coffee. And so, one thing that you've both highlighted particularly is the informal or the spontaneous conversation, or as one of my partners put it, I really miss the peripheral vision, which I thought was an interesting way to put it, that you can be working on your project and you can have a presentation of the next person's project, but that peripheral vision when you're walking through the studio and just seeing what's going on somebody's desk and just saying, wow, I really like that curtain wall. I think that model's so interesting. Or how did you do that drawing? Or that the spontaneous is what I think we all miss. And that's that will be I find that's really the hardest thing to achieve. You know, one of the best things is I think the technology has added to a sense of equality of participants in any meeting. So where it used to be, you were in a conference room, that was where the main meeting was going on, but someone was calling in remotely. Like, and maybe the technology wasn't great, or they were a little head on a screen and they're sort of in the corner. They're not really part of the meeting. Now look at us. We are all on the screen together. We can see everybody's reaction. No one's sitting in a big conference room behind a big conference table. We can see each other's body language. And we could be technically all over, calling in from all over the world. We did a very interesting study in our office. We asked, where are you? And we're all New Yorkers who all work in the New York office. We found out that our staff is today in 38 states and some in other countries as well. So, you know, we're all the New York office, but we are literally, it's not like we're here and in Westchester. We're here, we're all literally all over. So I think there's that, and yet it's not apparent, because the way we're working, as long as you're in the right time zone and you can plug in and be awake at that hour, it affords great equality and ease of us working with people in our Singapore office. And we've always worked with our remote offices or our other offices, but now there's a real equality because we're all on the screen equally, and it really does not matter where you're calling in from. So there have been some advantages. So that leads me to a question about what kind of things do you think are here to stay? Or what would you hope is here to stay? What is the silver lining of this? That as we do come back to an altered world, that we hope we shouldn't lose. I know my daughter says it's like much nicer to go out to dinner and sit 12 feet from the next person than to have them like right next door. So, you know, there's what are the benefits that we hope are here? This is to anyone who would like to jump in.
I can start it off. We have a system, as I mentioned, a certification. It applies to buildings and it applies at an organizational scale too. We also have a community version of it, but they're all called WELL. And WELL cuts across 10 different concepts: air, water, light, thermal comfort, material health, nourishment, physical activity, light, community connectivity, mental health and well-being. I don't know if I got all 10, I stopped counting at some point. One of the things that we did when we stood up that COVID-19 task force, in fact, the core purpose of that task force was to do a scan of our entire system. We called it Well version 2. It was in pilot. And on the day that we sent our New York City office to remote work indefinitely, we decided to postpone the vote that was happening the following day to bring Well version 2 out of pilot. We said we have to do this scan. So we started to look for what are the additional things, what are the changes that we would make based on the science and the research, what we know about this virus. And we were, in fact, a couple months ahead on that assignment because 20 of our employees are in China. They were essentially on lockdown for 2 months before we were. And they had started to cull all of that research and map it to what our certification, what our standards said. So what's really fascinating about this and what lends itself to thinking about what are the silver linings and the things that are here to stay and what is going to be, you know, what should go away as soon as the risk of exposure also goes away, is that we made very few changes to our system. The kinds of design interventions and organizational interventions that we recommended before the pandemic are largely the same as the ones that we recommend thereafter. So for instance, enhanced ventilation and filtration, separately ventilated bathrooms that require minimal touching of surfaces, soap cartridges, you know, hand washing and hand drying. On the organizational side, support for annual flu vaccinations, ample sick leave that is separated from personal time off or paid time off so that you don't create a disincentive for people to stay home when they feel sick. These things should all stay. They were in our wellness certification before for a reason. Many of the same things that you would want to do, for instance, to prevent an outbreak of the flu during flu season are the same things that we want to do to prevent an outbreak of COVID-19. In terms of what goes away, we were very careful to only focus on those types of interventions within a few different features in our system that we call emergency preparedness, emergency resilience. Those are the physical distancing, the PPE, the excessive, appropriate now but not later use of hand sanitizers, and so forth and so on. So, I think there's a small number of things that are probably most visible to us, right? And they're the things that really feel like an imposition on our lives, like staying 6, 10, 12 feet apart. But it turns out that from a design perspective, from an organizational plan and protocol perspective, a lot of these things are really good upgrades that we're going to make to our work and to our lives.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so building on the idea of how can design help this situation and help shape people's interest in coming back to work and what people might be looking for in this new post-COVID environment. One question from our audience is, and I think this is probably a Kent question, are people asking for different kinds of things as they look for space in New York? Are they asking for bike storage? Or is there a sense that people will be doing more biking when they come to work? And will they be looking for more outdoor space? Are terraces in greater demand? And that would apply both to residential as well as to offices, but particularly in offices where people are concerned about being in a conference room. We don't have the weather of California, but I know, to quite do the indoor-outdoor thing, but we're getting much better at it. And it'll be interesting to see how long restaurants really stay active outside as the winter gets colder. So that's a question for you, Kent.
Sure. The answer is yes, there are things that are being done that I think will have somewhat of a lasting effect. I just moved into my office space. I happen to have a 1,500 square foot outdoor terrace. And I've had meetings here for the past couple of weeks with people that have not and will not go into offices at the moment because, again, they don't feel the secureness. But to go outside and come over and have a drink or have a lunch, it's a whole new thing. So will outdoors impact? Yes. Right now, we happen to be on the 3rd floor. We were on the 44th floor a couple of weeks ago. We moved offices. My staff is thrilled that we're on the 3rd floor. One, it's less elevator time, and two, if you walk up the stairs, it's much easier. So now, I've always been one that I walk upstairs in buildings all the time just because I find it easier and faster. But I think as stairs become, on the lower floors, people are going to be much more in habit forming to do something like that. Outdoor space, terraces for residential, absolutely. It's much more interesting at people. For offices, the fact that you can have a window that opens, that was considered a B building or C building or less. That's a positive thing now because the differential of having a window open and changing the airflow was very significant. So that will that stay? I don't know. As Rachel would say, I don't know if that becomes still in vogue and going into an all glass tower or not. But certainly now it's something that people want. Residential, I can tell you, I'm looking at a building that we're looking to develop right now, and one of the things that we used to have was a wine cooler, right? You put, got a nice, a refrigerator, all this, but you got to have a wine cooler. So instead of that, we're placing a growth container, if you will, refrigeration, so you could grow lettuce and other foods. Will that stay? I thought that was a wonderful thing and very interesting. And home offices are they going to become important? Yes. Now we have some issues with the zoning code, but clearly you've got some deep spaces in these older buildings, but you're not allowed to have a space in that because it doesn't have a window. Now, a home office doesn't necessarily need a window. So will that go and be, much more, the standard if we can get zoning to approve that? Yes, I think a home office, because it's going to be part of our life, I think. And as Sam said, you've got people going and say, I'm going to take the day at home and I'm going to answer all these emails and I'm not going to have phone interruptions and I'm not going to have business interruptions in my office. I'm going to be very, very efficient. So these are the components that I think are going to change our design review and what people are looking for. And I think ultimately to the positive, the stimuli for doing it is not a very good thing, which is a COVID, but what we do with it and how we incorporate in our lives and our design, and that could be a very positive thing. And people working from home now, there are, if with proper supervision, those are opportunities for people. And I think that's very, very helpful.
All right. So now on a different track, one of our questions from the audience, which I think is an excellent question. Sam, can you take a deep dive into, or at least a dive in this time frame, into what kinds of mass transit and urban mobility innovations do we really need and can be rapidly executed to get our to change perception, I would say, about our mass transit system?
Yeah, for sure. I won't take a deep dive. I will say, please feel free to follow up with me after, and we can talk about some of the engineering solutions. I'm also an engineer, so we've been looking at this from a very technical perspective, a civil engineering perspective as well. I'd say probably the biggest challenge we face is one that Kent mentioned, which is that to do a lot of the things that we want to do, even things that can be done quickly, we need funds. The importance of federal support for infrastructure projects and the subway system in particular in New York shouldn't be understated. It's our ability to maintain the levels of service that we've become accustomed to as New Yorkers is really in the balance right now. And it fundamentally changes, I think, the equation of what it means to be a New Yorker if we see a significant diminishment in the subway system. In terms of the kinds of intervention, I'd say the most important thing is for any city to be looking at multimodal transportation models. So while we're heavily dependent upon the subway in New York, what are the other ways in which people can actually get to work? And it's going to mean bikes, it's going to mean buses, it's going to mean staggering work hours, whether start and finish. It's going to mean making sure that, and this comes back to a point that Kent made earlier, that people should feel safe in their commuting patterns, I feel as comfortable as I have always felt going from one place to another in New York City. I think what we hear from people is that there's a sense of anxiety or nervousness, whether it's real or perceived, around their level of safety in the city. We have to address that because it's, if the idea is to lower congestion, the fact of congestion is one of the things that keeps crime rates low. Can't get away with anything in New York without someone seeing. If we've got relatively lower rates of congestion, we have to address that itself may be contributing to people's sense of nervousness. But multimodal transportation, ensuring that the ferry system is running, giving people different modes of transportation to work. The other thing that I think ultimately ties into this becomes, sort of a role of the businesses in the city itself, which is to embrace this notion that we could have a different balance that does incorporate some meaningful and smart element of remote working, not in a way that undermines our culture as organizations and our cohesiveness, our ability to mentor young people, but one that's mindful of the fact that we may have childcare responsibilities, and otherwise we see a disproportionate impact on women in the workforce and their ability to actually sort of re-engage. Now that's not a normative statement. I'm not saying it should be the case that women are carrying a disproportionate share of the caregiving role. That's what we observe, and we observe it has a really hard impact on women and families with children when the schools are only bringing kids in 2 or 3 days a week. So, but in allowing people to have this as an element of their overall plan, how that indirectly plays into the transportation system and the multimodal vision that we have. So you think about this in terms of like that 15-minute city model where people have more local options, is that it opens up a wider range of locations. And so, this comes back to the fact that, this question of, the internet and technology, whether it sort of substitutes for or enhances co-location, is a question that's been around for a long time. It precedes the pandemic. In the early days of the internet, some of my colleagues at Wharton, there was a paper called "Is the Internet a Complement or a Substitute for Cities?" And what they found was that, based on their analysis of the time, this is going back to the 90s now, the internet and the technologies that we have access to enhance the productivity and the serendipity of being co-located. They don't undermine it or replace it. But giving people the option to work from another location where it makes sense does also have this important efficiency effect in that we can optimize over location better than we're able to now. So right now you've got some folks who care about a good quality public school, and they may not have access to it in their particular neighborhood in the city. But given the nature of their commute to work, 5 days a week, moving further away might not have been a viable option. Now, being able to say, maybe my commute's only 3 days, only 4 days. I can optimize over a wider range of potential locations where now I can also be considering, okay, where does the school system, where does open space play into this? And I think the folks that are most significantly impacted by that as a closing point are all of the folks who have been working from home but may have been in relatively small, you imagine sort of the couple working in a studio apartment where their bedroom is their dining room, is their office for 6 or 7 months. Being able to optimize over a wider range of locations makes a big difference.
Yeah. Okay.
I was just going to make one comment on there. The other thing is that our traditional workday, the concept of 9 to 5, that's changed, and technology has changed that. So my assistant today said, "Can I take 2 hours off to go be with her children?" Yes, because will she work now at 7 o'clock to 8 o'clock at night and still get whatever it needs to be done, get done? Yes. So if we can offer that to our workforce, we can still be very, very efficient. We can have a better quality of life. And we're not really, yes, there's things that have to be done during the workday, but there's other things that don't. And that I think is going to be, that's a big change. And first of all, we're all addicted now to technology. So there is no such thing as being home anymore, away. And even pre-COVID, you're always, and if people don't answer an email, people, why didn't you answer? Why did So now we can formalize this.
Because we got one more train of a series of questions that are on a single, and so you get 1 minute to answer this, Kent, because it's directed towards you. What about landlords changing their lease arrangements? Only you can answer this question.
Let me tell you,
shorter leases
for me,
and to allow
my tenants,
to allow pop-up mom and pop stores, to allow more flexibility so people don't have to commit for so long, to help get our city back together and to help create new businesses, encourage entrepreneurship and so forth. What do you think?
First of all, for me, the buildings don't give you hugs. The buildings don't pay rent. The buildings don't do that. People do. So the lifeblood of any business is the tenants, the people. So that's number one. So, to take a very hard line and say you can't be flexible, then you're really hurting yourself and being a little myopic in that approach. So it is a human business. The real estate business is a mirror reflection of the businesses, the economics around us. We're not really a business all unto ourselves. We're the reflection of all the people who occupy the space. So we have to be flexible and accommodate that, within reason. Now, creating pop-ups, great ideas in this, then you have to go through, there's insurance you need, and there's rights and tenants' rights. So if you do the right things, you can do them with license agreements, absolutely. And I'm for the activation of space, I think is a very good thing. I don't think retail is going to go turned into residential or commercial. I think it will stay retail. And it will be changing and informed changes I mentioned earlier. We have to accommodate that.
All right, thank you. So we are just about out of time. Just one comment is that if you've written questions, our panelists, you should feel free to take a look at the questions afterwards and write back a response if you like. And I think from here, I'm going to turn it over to Elizabeth for some closing remarks. And I would like to thank everybody for your really thoughtful comments and responses and the diversity of perspectives that you brought to the table. So, Elizabeth?
Thank you so much. Sorry, just a small technological glitch. Speaking of technology, thank you all for this wonderful conversation. And it's really clear from the thread of questions that we haven't been able to answer on screen here that we could have gone on for much longer on this topic. And I think we probably all will, perhaps not exactly in this grouping, but obviously this is a very important question to New York. I think, one of the things that it might be a topic for a future discussion that some of you touched on that I think is really important is that New York central business districts have already begun to show up as a much more diffuse form throughout all 5 boroughs. And I think that the question about how that relates Sam, to your point about the 15-minute city would be a wonderful other discussion to have at a later time. But we couldn't be more delighted to have you all, so thank you so much for participating. I'd also like to thank my colleagues at MAS who make this magic happen for all of us. Tara and Iana and Jackie are really extraordinary at their jobs, both thinking, conceptualizing these sessions to begin with, and then executing them excellently. So thank you to all of you. I hope that if you're not already a member of MAS, that you will consider joining. Your membership dollars help us keep this programming coming and support our continuing policy and advocacy work as well. Please visit mas.org/events to see what we have coming up. We have a fall of great programming, and we hope that you'll join us for another evening as well. So thank you all again for your time. Fabulous speakers, for the audience who joined us tonight, and we hope you all have a wonderful evening.